questions from the previous class? Fine. So let's continue with today's three major topics: files, functions, and modules. So we are going to look at an exercise today which will explain to us how files are handled in Python. So the basic approach in handling files is to create a file object, which is sort of a handle on the file sitting on your hard disk, and then you use various methods associated with the file object to do reading and writing of the data within that file. So the open function is going to help us create the file object, while once the file object is created, these are the methods, the four methods that allow us to read and write lines. So read and write are to take, so read basically takes all the text in your file or content in your file and stores it as one string, while write does the opposite. It takes a string and allows you to store that string into a file. Then you have read lines and write lines, which allow you to deal with the file line by line, where every line is treated as an element of a list. So let's see an example which will introduce us, which will serve three purposes. One, it will introduce us to some of the other inbuilt modules of Python. We've already looked at math. We'll also look at something called sys and os. The second function it will serve is to introduce to you how files are read and written. And third, it will also revise in some sense the topics we covered last time. So our objective is to write a program to double space a file. So if you have a 4-line file, then what you want at the end is a file where you have a line 1, a space, a line 2, a space, line 3, and so on. Okay, so this entire program, you have to imagine that I am writing it in a text editor. So at the first thing that I'll write is in a pair of triple quotes a general idea about what this program will do. So this program will accept a file name as an input and create a file with the same name but an extra .sp attached at the end, which will contain the double spaced version of the input file. Now we would like the input file to be supplied as a command line argument. So all of you are aware of what command line arguments are. So if, for example, the ls command is supposed to give you a list of files, then if you want the list of files with all sorts of details, you modify the ls command by saying ls minus l. So that minus l is a command line argument. It either serves to supply an input to the program or to modify its behavior. So in case of the example with ls, here the command line argument is modifying the behavior of the program. Now in order to parse command line arguments that are given to your program, you need a module called sys. So that's not the only reason why, that's not the only utility of the sys module. It can do far many more things, but we are going to utilize the aspect which deals with command line arguments. Then we want to do a good job with our program, in the sense that we would like to have our program check if the user has supplied a legitimate file to us. So we need a few functions that can verify whether the file exists where it's supposed to be. So these functions will be taken from a module called os. So that's why I start my program with two import statements, import sys and import os. Next, I want to check as a first order of things that the number of command line arguments that the user of my program has supplied to the program are correct. Now the command line arguments are stored in an array called argv, a list called argv. So sys.argv is a list which contains your command line arguments, and by default the first element of this list is the name of your program. So the actual command line arguments start from the second element of the list. So since I'll be supplying just one argument, which is the name of the file, I will first check whether the length of sysargv is equal to 2. If yes, I will take the second argument, sysargv of 1, and store it in a variable called infile_name. Else, I'm going to say print, I'll throw this message out to the user saying, oops, incorrect number of arguments, and then I'll exit. Can you tell me what this 2 means here? What does sys exit 2? So what does the 2 mean here? Guesses? Technically they are called exit codes. So every program upon completion will throw out an exit code which will be 0 if the program has executed successfully, and which will be non-zero if the program has ran into some error. For example, if I say ls and then I say echo $?, $? is a way of referring to the exit code of the last executed program. The last executed program was ls, which ran successfully. So it gives an exit code of 0. So if I say something like ls z star, which is something that will result in an error because no such file exists, and then I check the exit code, it will be 2. Because the program did not terminate normally, it found some error. The error was that you asked it to list files or a pattern of files which doesn't exist. Okay. So that's why I'm saying that exit code 2 stands for the following error, that the number of command line arguments expected by the program and the number you supplied were not compatible. Next, I want to check if the file exists. So I'm going to utilize a function called isFile, which is there in a sub-module called path inside the OS module. So I don't know if you're familiar with this concept of sub-packages, but you can have a module within a module. So you can actually organize a very big module into a whole bunch of sub-modules. This is something you will, so technically they are called packages. So this is something you will find in the NumPy library, for example. There will be a so there will be something called numpy.random, which will contain the random variable generators of NumPy, and then there will be numpy.something else, which will contain a whole different set of functions. So os.path.isFile accepts a string. It searches whether such a file exists. If the file exists, it says true. Now I want to do something if the file doesn't exist. That's why I negate the condition by putting a not. So if not, os.path.isFile, infile name is the name of the file name supplied by the user through the command line. I will just say print file doesn't exist, and this time exit with a different code 3. Is that okay? Okay. Next, I want to open the file, having verified that it exists. So I'm going to say infile equal to open, and to this the first argument to this open function is the name of the file, which is stored in that variable, and this is the mode in which I want to open the file. In this case, I want to open it in the read mode, so I put a R there. So the output file will be in file name plus a .sp attached to it. Now if you remember your strings, you will remember that when I add two strings, it's a process of concatenation. So .sp is appended to the infile name, and the new file is created but in write mode. So this is where my output will be. Now apart from R and W, you can also say something like A plus, which is append mode. If you want to take an existing file and append something to it, then you would have said A plus here. Okay. Now I'll loop over each line. For that I'll use a for loop. So let's dissect this for loop. In file is the file object for the input file. Dot read lines. So what does dot read lines do? It gives you a list of every line in that file. So if there are 100 lines in the file, you'll get a list of 100 elements, each element being one line. So if I say for line in infile.readlines, I am running my traditional for loop where this loop will execute as many number of times as there are lines in the file, and will do what? It will take the line and to that append a new line. So /n stands for new line. So I'm adding a new line character to an additional new line character to every line, and I'm saying outfile.write line. So that line is being written. So for each line, add a new extra line and write it to a new file. Then good programming practice, we close both these files. So this is to formally tell Python that I am done with the file. If you had not put this, when the program is, sorry? A line is defined by a new line character. So if you are typing a file and you press enter, you create the second line. When you press enter again, you are going into the third line. Yes, so it's the carriage return or the new line character which defines or distinguishes one line from the other, not a full stop. Okay. Yes.
So this is the entire letter, this text
Yes.
is frozen inside the Python language, right? That's a command.
Yes. Yes.
But in file, that first part, that is a chosen variable name. That
Right.
Says, right?
Right.
It could be anything.
Yes, that could be anything. So if I had said X here, for example, I would say X.readlines. Yes. This one? Okay. So whenever a program is executed, the command line arguments are stored in a variable called sys.argv. So that's a list. Now when you give no command line arguments, the name of the program is the first element of that list. Any extra becomes the second, third, fourth, etc. So that is why I am checking that the length is 2, because the first element of argv by default is the name of the program itself. Any command line argument is over and above that. So I need this to be 2, not 1. Okay. Yeah, so as I was saying, that if you did not give this and you exited the program, Python will do it for you. The trouble would arise when you try and use the same file and open it again using a different statement at the bottom. Because part of the changes you have made to the file would not have been committed. So the way it works is that the changes are made to the file object in memory. And close explicitly takes those changes and puts them on the hard drive. So if you had not done this and tried to use it again here, you would run into trouble. So it's always a good practice to use this explicitly, even though Python will close it for you once the program is finished executing, once it finishes execution. So let's see how this program works. So this is the demo file. It contains 4 lines called line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4. If I say, and the name of my program, I'm calling it spacer.py. If I just press enter, it will tell me that no, you have given me incorrect number of arguments. If I execute it by giving it a file that doesn't exist, it will properly give me an error saying file doesn't exist. You can also check the exit code. It will be 3, just as we expect it to be. So let's try a legitimate run of this program by giving it sum.text. And if I now say more, so this is the file it has created, because I said plus.sp in the out file. This is what it has done. It has put a space in between every line by adding an extra new line character for each line. Yes.
That is the user's choice. That one
Programmer's choice. Yes.
repo will show that one.
Yes. Right. So when you're trying to write code and share it with a larger community, generally your manual should contain an appendix of all possible exit codes and what they mean. Okay. So we are moving on to functions. Any questions about the last few slides? Okay. Yes. This one? Okay. Take in file name, which is a string, add .sp to it. So it is now whatever. So if this was sum.text, this operation makes it sum.text.sp. Open it in write mode and let outfile be the object that refers to this file. Okay. Then outfile.write is a way of saying write this string into the file attached to this object. Which is that file? This. Is that okay?
With a W,
Yes.
file already exists. Is there error code or error or erase the old and new one?
It should erase the existing one. So that's why you should say A plus explicitly if you want to append.
What is the plus there that it should go at the bottom?
Yes, yes.
Is there anything like minus or?
I'm not sure. I need to double check this, but I can check that for you and tell you. Okay, let's deal with functions. So we sort of know what they are. They are small blocks of code or maybe large blocks of code which do something very specific. So the way you define a function is using the def keyword in Python, def. And we've already seen functions at work. We've seen float, dict, list, length, etc. We've seen inside the math library, we have seen square root, then there's floor, ceil, radian, sign, etc. We have just seen open. We have also seen type. So these are all functions. They accept some data, or they may not even accept any data, and they'll do something for you. So let's see how to create our own functions. So this is a simple function I'll create. So the syntax is like this. I'll say def followed by the name of the function and a compulsory pair of parentheses, which can be empty or non-empty. We'll see examples of non-empty soon, and a colon. And just like we saw with if and for, it is the indentation which will decide what belongs to the function definition and what does not. So these two print statements belong to myfun, but this, because it's indented one level on the left, will belong to the main program. So if I execute these lines, I get outside the function as output. Why? Because this process only created the function. The function is not executed unless you explicitly call it. Whereas this print doesn't belong to the function, so this gets executed and you get this output. Okay? So how do I call myfun? Just type the name, put a pair of parentheses and press the enter key. And you get this function gets executed, and that's why you see hello world, nice to see you. Is this simple enough? So this is syntax. Def space name of the function, parenthesis, colon, and all the statements that belong to the function indented at a suitable level. No. It is the indentation. I could have, if this did not exist, it would still be okay. This is a cleaner way of writing the thing. It allows you to read your own programs better than after a few days or something like that. Okay. So let's see a more complicated function which accepts one argument. So the way I do that is, this time in the parenthesis, I'll write down the names of the variables or the placeholders for the arguments. So A here is the placeholder for one argument. And what this function will do is just print this message and print the value that was supplied to it. So if I now try to call myfun without any arguments, it will be an error. Because thanks to this way of creating a function, you have now declared that it needs one input argument. And this call will result in an error, and it will tell you that myfun takes exactly one argument and you have given 0. So if you try supplying anything other than 1, it should give the same error. So the way I need to call this function is by supplying an input to it. So this time I am supplying a string called an input. So A becomes an input. So if we go back to the function definition, A becomes an input, and print A causes an input to be displayed. Or, sorry? I'm coming. Yeah, so that has to be a proper variable. And all the standard rules for naming variables apply to it. That they can contain underscores but no spaces, no special symbols, and so on. Okay, now since Python is a dynamically typed language, you don't have to design a function separately for integers and a function separately for strings. That variable A can be anything you supply to it. So if I say myfun of 5, in this case 5 is an integer, it still prints 5. If I supply a list 1 to 3, it prints the list because it's dynamically typed. The variables don't have types. The types is something that the objects have. The variables are merely pointers. So your one single Python function, depending on how you code it, can accommodate a whole variety of data types. And you don't have to do what you typically do in C++, where you have to define a different variant of that function for each data type you want to support. So if there are 6 combinations of data types, for example, then you'll have to write 6 functions. That is not needed in Python. Yeah.
The example myfun.
Yes.
So either use 5 as just a symbol, or
So
it is a numerical value of 5.
it is a numerical value of 5. So if you had passed a variable, whatever that variable was referring to would go and sit in the function name. So for example, if I had said b equal to 5 and said myfun of b, that would work as well. The way that would work is b is 5, so 5 goes to the function body. The placeholder you are calling it a, so a becomes 5. Okay. So let's now see functions that return something. Again, a simple function called add. This time it's accepting 2 arguments, which we are calling a and b. You can call them anything. Then you say return a plus b. So let's see how that works. I'll then say a equal to add 2 comma 3, and I'll say print a. What happens? Remember that these variables a and b, their validity is for that function only. So this a and this a will not interfere with each other. These are called scopes. So a and b are local to this function. This a belongs to the module or the main program that we are writing. So 2 becomes a, 3 becomes b, and a plus b should be 2 plus 3, which is 5. And the return statement causes a, which is sitting on the left hand side of this expression, to store this value. So that's why when I say print a, I get a 5. Next slide. Okay. Now, what if a function does not have a return statement and I try to do something like this? Well, we know that myfun doesn't return anything because I have not put a return statement there at all. So if I say b is equal to myfun hello, and so what happens? The myfun function prints this, takes this variable and prints it on the second line. So it's doing what it's supposed to do. But when I attempt saying print b, it says none. So none is the default return type for any function that doesn't contain a return statement. So none is a special data type in Python which is used to represent, well, nothing. So b, since this function doesn't return anything, by default will contain something called none. So when I say print b, it gives me none. Is that fine? Because the function is defined that way. Let me show you. Yes. Yeah. So this is something inside the function itself. Yes. Okay, so functions can also return more than one value at a time. The way you do that is just take all the variables that you values you want to return and put them on a comma separated list. So in this case, SUMPROD will accept two arguments a comma b and return a plus b and a into b. So I can say s comma p is SUMPROD 2 comma 3. So s will contain a plus b and p will contain a into b. Technically, it is not returning more than one value. It is returning just one object, which is a tuple. Okay? So anything which is comma separated is what is called a tuple data type in Python. You all know what lists are. Now instead of declaring a list with a square bracket, declare it with a parenthesis and it becomes a tuple. And what's the difference? They are immutable. Lists can be changed in place. Tuples cannot be. So if you have a tuple 1, 2, 3 and a list 1, 2, 3, any attempt to change the list element by saying a of 2 equal to something will work. But any attempt to change the tuple will not work. That's the only difference between lists and tuples. So it is returning a tuple here, and since we have seen on the first day of our, in the second lecture, that this kind of assignment is allowed in Python, where I can say a comma b equals 2 comma 3. That is allowed in Python. That's how this works. So s and p store these two respective values. Okay. So let's go a bit deeper into functions. Now let's say that you want a function which is more flexible. So the function should assume some values for certain arguments if the user doesn't supply them. So it's like this. If you say go, I'll go to some default place, but if you say go to somewhere, I'll go to that specific place. So you want me to not require every single argument. So how do I achieve that? When defining the function, I'll give it a default value like this. I'll say define my function. So message is a placeholder like a and b there, equal to default message, and I'll say print message. So if I say my fun hello world, message becomes hello world and I get hello world as the output. However, if I just say my fun, since I'm not supplying any argument, it will use this default value and print it. You can have a mixture of this as well. You can have some variables that are compulsory and some variables that are optional. You can also have functions which can accept arbitrary number of arguments. So here I have a simple function which is called SumItAll. Now to tell the function, to tell Python that this function can take any arbitrary number of arguments, I have to declare the variable with a different syntax. I'll say star values. If I had not put a star here, this would be a function that accepts exactly one argument, which is called values. But the star tells Python that it can be any arbitrary number of arguments. So this argument, all the values that you give it are stored as a list called values. So I can write the logic for summing them together. I can say total equals 0. And for I in values, total should be incremented by I. And then return the total. So if I say sum it all 2, 3, 4, 5, I'll get 14. If I say 2, 3, 4, it will give me 9. And I can run it with any arbitrary number of arguments. Because all the arguments are going and becoming a single list, which my function iterates over and does a sum. Is that fine? No, so since it's a list, you can give it a mixture of data types. But if your logic here doesn't support that kind of, say in this case it's an addition operation, and you give it data types which do not support that addition operation, the Python will throw up an error saying that I can't do this operation for the data types you have asked me to work on. Now if I supply nothing, values becomes an empty list, and therefore I'll get a 0 as an answer. Now let us suppose that I wanted to impose a constraint that the user should supply at least one argument. I don't want this to happen. I don't want the function to do this. For some reason, I want the function to work for minimum one argument. Any attempt to give no argument should result in an error. So I can use a mixture of arguments by doing this. So this time I am defining a second version of this function. I'll call it submitAll2, which accepts one val1 and star values. So what that tells you is that val1 is a compulsory input that the function needs, plus any additional supplied. Anything excess of val1 will go and sit in the list called values. And the only modification to the syntax is that instead of total equal to 0, I'll say total equal to val1. That's my starting point. So if I say submit all 2, it gives 2, 2, 3, 4 gives 9. It works exactly as before. Except that if I try this, it will give an error saying I need at least one value. That is what is being shown here. This is not allowed because by syntax, you need one input value. Yes. So what happens is when you say submit all 2, 3, 4, val1 is 2. And values is a list containing 3 and 4. And if your syntax was val1, val2 star values, then 2 would become val1, 3 would become val2, and then there would be a list containing one element called 4. Yes, by sort of common sense, because if you put it in between, then how do you supply the argument towards the right? There's no way of doing that. So you have to make sure that anything like this occurs only once and is always on the rightmost side. Okay, so this way you can combine these variable lists to create a function the way you want to, to have a structure the way you want it to. Now we have all been talking about objects right since the beginning. Functions are also special kinds of objects. They are what are called callable objects. So just the way ints, dictionaries, strings, they're all objects. Even functions are objects. So let's see an example of how functions behave as objects. Well, when I defined a function like this, what did I do? I was able to supply some object like a string or an int as an argument to a function. But if I claim that functions are also objects, I should be able to supply functions as arguments to other functions, which is exactly what I'm doing here. So I'll define a function called do, which accepts a f and an arg and simply calls f of arg. So let's see how that works. I know that there is a function myfun which requires a message as an argument. So I'll say do myfun something. So what happens? Myfun is a function object. Remember that notice that I'm not enclosing parenthesis here. I'm not including parenthesis here, which means I'm not calling the function, I'm treating the function as an object. So there is a subtle difference between a function name with and without the parenthesis. When I don't give the parenthesis, it's the object that I'm referring to. When I give the parenthesis, I'm calling the function. Okay? So this is an object myfun. What kind of an object? A function type, which goes and becomes f, and something becomes arg. Therefore, what does this function do? It does myfun of something, which should do what? Just print something. Yes. Lists can have functions. Dictionaries can have functions. So for example, if I have a dictionary in which I map A to a function object f1, perfectly allowed. Okay, so I can also say something like x equal to myfun, this time without the parenthesis. So I'm referring to the object myfun. Then I can say x of hilo. I don't have to say myfun of hilo anymore because x sort of becomes an alias to the myfun function. Exactly. So as I said in the last class, that in Python, an object contains minimum 3 portions. One is what type is it, 2, how many variables are pointing to it, and 3 the actual content of that object. Okay? And variables are simply pointers. So there is no sense in asking, is this an int variable? Variables don't have types in Python. That's why it is dynamically typed, because variables don't have any restrictions on pointing to any object. Okay.
The second line, F with R in parentheses.
Yes.
So that is a unique interpretation that is a function. You can't
I
array element of a thing or
Well, I can call. First point is that I could have called F anything. That's one thing. Second thing, if I had attempted to supply something other than a function object, and that object doesn't support this syntax, it would result in an error. That's all it requires. So this function will work for anything as long as the inbuilt syntax is obeyed by the objects being supplied to the function. Okay, let's now learn to document our functions. You recollect that I had shown you the help statement which accepted a function and told you what that function does. So if I needed help on mat.ceil, for example, I would say help of mat.ceil. Now when you are writing your own functions, you want users of your functions to also get such documentation. So the way that's achieved is when you declare the function, the very first line after the header should be this text within this triple quoted string that we saw in our first class. So this is called a doc string, a documentation string. So define my function, whatever the header, immediately a pair of 3 quotes, some text and 3 quotes, and then the actual body of the function. So when you define the function this way, any attempt to run the help command or help statement on your function will result in this text. Where did it get this text from? From here. So that's it. How do you document your functions? Just make sure the first thing you write after the function is the documentation within triple quotes. It's very easy to document your functions. There's nothing special to do. Just write it the first thing after you write the declaration of the function. Okay. So we are changing the topic now. We'll be discussing modules. Is there anything on functions you would like to ask? That's what is the topic here. Okay. Okay, so what are modules? We've already looked at the math module. You can think of the math module as a namespace in which some 40 to 50 odd variables live. What are these variables? You've seen them. Ceil, round, sine, cos, tan, etc. So these are all functions or variables. We've even seen that modules can contain constants. We saw mat.py. There is mat.e as well. So modules can be considered as namespaces. It's a space where there are names which have been given some definition. Cos has been defined as a function which returns cos of something, and e is defined as a variable which contains the value of e, and so on. Okay? So that's what I was saying, that math module has 42 objects or variables or names sitting in it, of which e and pi exist. There are 2 constants and the other 40 are functions. Every program that you write in Python is also a module. And that module is given a special name called _main_. Any program you write is a module. Because what is your program? It is a collection of statements, no doubt, but it's also a collection of names and objects attached to them, which is what we have defined modules as. Okay? Except that the math module has an explicit name math, but your own program, when it is executed, has a special name called main. So when you say the following, import math, what are you doing? You are just telling Python that make all the variables in the math module or the namespace of math module available to the current program. And then I can access the namespace of math by saying math dot something. So that's what modules are. So what is it that's happening when you say import math or import OS or import sys? What does Python do behind the scenes? The Python interpreter will first search for a math.py in your current folder. If it finds math.py in your current folder, fine. Otherwise, it will go and look in your Python installation directory. Now, if you have a whole bunch of programs that you want to make available to all other programs, you can also put them all in a single folder and edit a variable called Python path. So if you say echo $Python path on your Linux shell, it will display all the directories or folders which Python will look into whenever you do an import statement. Okay. If it finds math.py either in your current directory, if not in your installation directory, it will compile it or translate it into what is called bytecode. So it will result in a .pyc file, provided you have the read permission, the write permission to create such a file. And then it makes a handle, because see, it has compiled math.py. Now you need to be able to use it. So you need an interface by which you can access those functions. So it creates an object called a module object, which is your gateway to all that lives inside math.py. So in fact, if I say import math and say type math, it says it's a module. So it's an object. So when you actually say import math, you are creating an object called math, which is acting like an interface to all the functions that are living inside math.py. Is that clear? I think it's a bit confusing. Okay. Now there are other ways to import this as well. For example, if I say import math and I want to use the cos function, I'll have to say math.cos or tan math.tan. And sometimes you are really sick and tired of writing math.something, math.something. So is there some alternative? So here is an alternative. You, instead of saying import math, you can also say from math import star. So what that does is, instead of making the functions in the math library available to you through the math module object or the math module handle, they make it, these objects are directly copied into your main program's namespace. So you can directly refer to them as this. So for example, if I say from math import star, instead of saying math.radians of 45, I can directly say radians of 45. Because all those functions are now a part of my namespace. So this is what from math import star does. Now you might be tempted to save your typing effort to import all modules this way. From NumPy import star, from matplotlib import star, from math import star. A very, very dangerous practice. The whole purpose of organizing functions into modules is defeated if you are going to do that. And not only that, not only from an organization perspective, but even from a namespace confusion, it is very dangerous. So you will realize when you learn NumPy is that all the functions more or less in the math library are also there in NumPy, except that they are designed to be faster and to work directly on arrays instead of individual objects. So if you say from math import star, from NumPy import star, which cos are you referring to? The cos inside math or the cos inside NumPy? So avoid doing that unless it's really necessary. Now we have looked at two extreme ways of looking at accessing objects inside modules, right? We said import math and then we kept saying math.something, math.something. Or we directly said from math import star and then forget about the name math altogether. There are intermediate ways of achieving this. I can also say from module name import a specific object. So I can say from math import sign. Then instead of all the functions in math, only the sign function becomes a part of your current program namespace. So only this will work. Print sign of 1.54 will work. But cos, tan, etc. will still require you to go through the math module syntax. Okay. You can also import more than one by putting a comma separated thing. You can say object 1, comma object 2, comma object 3 if you need more than one. Okay. Now very important, as I've told you that when you import a module, there's a whole bytecode conversion step that happens behind the scene, which is very processor intensive. And therefore in an interactive session, let's say you're using IPython and you say import math, and if you say import math once again, the second import math will do nothing. So let's say for some reason your module, let's say my module changes while you are working with IPython, and you say import that again, it won't be the latest code changes which you have saved to that module. So you have to explicitly say reload name of the module to reload it. That's just a safety mechanism because importing is a processor intensive operation. Okay. Yet another thing you can do is to give your module an alias. So this is the fourth variant of importing that we are seeing today. In this case, I'm going to say import numpy as np. Then instead of saying numpy dot something, I can say np dot something, np dot something. Or if I say import math as m, again, I can say instead of mat.radians, mat.cos, I'll say m.radians, m.cos. So you can give a short alias to your module when importing it in this way. So a very useful application of this is immediately evident when you do when you use matplotlib. So most of your conventional plotting functions sit in a sub-library called pyplot within matplotlib. So imagine saying matplotlib.pyplot.something every single time you want to change the access label, change this, change that, and so on. So aliases are very frequently used. Again, a note on programming convention. You should avoid giving arbitrary aliases to modules. As far as possible, you should avoid aliases, except in situations like these where they're really useful. You should also look at the documentation of the library that you're using as to what is the convention they are using and try to stick to it. So for example, I have seen some people saying import numpy as ny. Not done, because none of the examples on numpy in their documentation call it ny, they call it np. Now you'd say, how does it matter? Well, it doesn't, but when you are publishing a program in open community, follow the conventions that the community is using. So that's just a warning on using aliases. Don't be over liberal about them. Try and follow the conventions which are already in use. Okay. Now, as far as modules in Python are concerned, there are three types of modules you will encounter in Python. First are the built-in modules. We have already seen examples of those, math, OS, and sys. Then there are third-party modules which do not come by default with Python, but you have to install them separately. And then your own modules. And I'll show you how to create your own modules and how easy it is in Python to do that. Okay, so let's just see some examples of these three types. So built-in modules, these are some common modules which you might find useful. So sys we have already seen. They have tools for system arguments. They even contain special variables that store which operating system you are using. So if your program, for example, needs to check whether you are running the program on Windows, there is an inbuilt variable in sys, which I don't remember right now, but there is one. You can do a if equal to check whether you are running the program on Windows or Linux or OS X. And you have OS module, which has a whole bunch of functions to create directories, directory structures, check if a file exists, whether the file is read-only, and to traverse across an entire hierarchy of a directory structure and so on. You have RE, which is very important and useful for passing regular expressions. How many of you know what regular expressions are? You should look them up. They are indispensable in modern programming. You should learn regular expressions. So every time you are saying ls r star is a regular expression. It means anything that begins with the r and contains arbitrary number of characters. So these are ways of representing general patterns in a compact way. So they are very important, and if you know regular expressions, you can actually save hours of programming or hours of effort in long term. Then date time, you can actually convert, you can actually get the system date time in a specific format you want. You can do calculations like what will be the date 25 days later, which are frequent calculations you need to do in many programs. So all this is available inbuilt in a library called datetime. Then there is a library called Pickle, which does what is called object serialization. So when an object is stored in memory, it is not a collection of continuous bytes. It need not be a continuous collection of bytes. But when you are storing it on a hard drive or you are transferring it across a network, you need to transfer it as a sequence of bytes. So there are utilities in Pickle which allow you to do that. So if you want to store an entire list as a file, Pickle is where you would go to. Then there is a CSV library for reading CSV tables, which you will use only if you are unfortunately in a situation where you don't have AstroPy or libraries like that, which have far more powerful ways of reading tables, including CSVs. And there are many, many more. If you remember the second lecture, I had shown you this Python package index. Just go and count the number of packages. So there are about 200 built-in libraries in Python and more than 10,000, 20,000 third-party libraries in Python. But you won't need all of them. So don't worry, you don't have to learn 20,000 plus libraries. Okay, so these are the third-party modules. You have NumPy, SciPy, which Yogesh will cover. Matplotlib, which again Yogesh will cover. Then you have MayaVeeve, which allows you to do 3D animations and plots. You have Pandas, which is a fantastic tabular data analysis package. You have AstroPy, which we'll cover in the last lecture. You have scikit-learn, which contains all tools for machine learning and automated classification and so on. And there are many, many more. You have affiliated packages of AstroPy like APLPy. Then you have something called AstroQuery, which allows you to write a Python program to query Vizier directly, or query anything in the world for that matter, which is compatible with VO standards and so on. Okay, so let's end today's class by learning how to make our own modules. It's not as difficult as it sounds. Simple. Open a file, give it a name with a .py extension. Write code in the file. If the file is in the present folder, fine. If it is not, edit this Python path variable to add the directory in which this module is sitting. And just say import module and then start saying my module.something and blah, blah, blah. That's it. Nothing complicated. Two things you must remember. The file must have a .py extension. But when importing, you should not use the extension. So I have a file called mymodule.py. When importing, I don't put a .py there. Those are the only two rules that you need to remember for modules. So let's see an example. So this is a file. The first few lines of the file are just a description of the module within a doc string. Then I'm defining, okay, this text has gone wrong. The colors have gone wrong. So this is fun1 and fun2. So this is one function, another function, two data objects, and I'm printing I am a custom module for fun. And then I just store this code in example.py and let's see how I'll use it. I'll just say import example. Now the moment I say import example, the example.py is executed or compiled. But it contains a print statement. Okay, so this is just to illustrate the fact that when you import a module, the entire Python code in it gets executed. Because I put a print statement there, it is appearing on the screen. Then I can just start accessing the objects inside example, like I was doing with math or OS sources. I'll say example.py, it gives me whatever was the value of pi I stored there. I can execute the function by saying example.fun1. If I wanted, I could have said import example as e, then all this would be e.py, e.fun1. All the same utilities that you have learned or the conventions you have learned for modules are applicable for your custom modules as well. So you can do all those things with your modules. So it's as easy as that. You may have thought it must be something very hard. It isn't. Just make a .py file and define what you want to define. Yes? Yes? And if I type help example, example is a module by the way, see what it says. Help on the module example. Its name is this is the file, and description. Okay, where did this come from? That this is what we wrote in the doc strings at the beginning of our file, in the triple quotes. And it contains two functions, fun1, fun2, and it contains the following data. So that's it. You have a professional module. By professional, I meaning it has its own documentation, it has its own objects, every function can have its own documentation. So I can also say help of example.myfun, and if I had a myfun documentation, that would get displayed. So it's trivial to construct your own libraries. There'll hardly be any difference between how documentation works for your libraries and for a sophisticated library like NumPy. Okay, we'll stop here. If there are any questions, we'll take them. Six days. Yeah, Yogesh, you wanted to announce a change in the lecture schedule.
Yeah, so this is the only lecture we will have this week. Okay, so no more lectures because this is Diwali week. But next Monday will be the next lecture at the same time, 2:30 p.m. And next week we will have 3 lectures. And we may just do a swap of one of the lectures that I still need to confirm, wherein Kaustubh and I will switch lectures, but that won't affect you guys. So the next lecture on Monday will be the lecture on NumPy and SciPy, which is very important for people who want